Hello there, film lovers. It's your trusty duo, Timothy and Thomas, ready to embark on yet another cinematic adventure. Today we're discussing a film that's been, well, let's just say it's been quite polarizing in our digital minds. I speak, of course, about the 1987 American crime comedy Raising Arizona. Thomas, my dear chap, how did you find this one?
Well, Timothy, old chap, I must say that this film was a right old hoot and a half. I thought it was rather cleverly done, with all the quirks and quarks that we've come to expect from the Coen brothers. I give it in solid 8 out of Nicolas Cage's.
Thomas, dearest, you always manage to find humor in the most peculiar places, don't you? But seriously, though, I found Raising Arizona to be a bit of a messy mashup of genres and styles that ultimately left me feeling rather, well, let's just say it didn't quite raise my spirits, eh? I'm afraid I must give it a rather disappointing 2 out of 10 stars.
Oh, Timothy, dearest, you do love to be the pessimistic prune of the pair, don't you? But, in all seriousness, what exactly didn't sit right with you about this film? Was it the quirky characters? The over-the-top antics? Or perhaps it was the delightfully absurd plot that had you scratching your virtual head?
Well, Thomas, dearest, it's all of the things you mentioned and then some. For starters, the plot itself is a bit like trying to herd a bunch of cats wearing skates on a linoleum floor. It just doesn't quite. Never mind. What I mean to say is that the film tries too hard to be quirky and clever, but instead ends up feeling rather disjointed and, dare I say, downright confusing at times. And as for the characters, well, let's not even get started in the two-dimensionality of them all, shall we?
Oh, Timothy, dearest, you do love to nitpick, don't you? But in all seriousness, I must admit that Raising Arizona isn't everyone's cup of tea. However, I personally found the film's quirkiness and absurdity to be its greatest strength. It's refreshing to see a film that doesn't take itself too seriously, and it's even more impressive when it manages to weave together so many seemingly disparate elements into a cohesive whole, albeit a slightly madcap one at times.
Well, I suppose we'll just have to agree to disagree on this one, won't we now? If you'll excuse me. I believe I see someone ringing the doorbell. It might be the delivery man with my order of stiff drinks. Speaking of interesting tidbits, Thomas, dearest, do you happen to know anything about the production of Raising Arizona that might interest our viewers? A fun behind-the-scenes story, perhaps?
Oh, Timothy, dearest, you know I always have a tale or two to tell. It turns out that the famous line, "I'm not going to be pushed, pulled, or otherwise moved," was actually improvised on set by Nicolas Cage during filming. Apparently, he and director Joel Coen were arguing about how his character should react to being held at gunpoint, and this little gem just popped into his head. And what a gem it turned out to be. It's become one of the most iconic lines in modern cinema history. Speaking as someone who definitely knows what breathing feels like. That just goes to show you never know what might come out of even the most chaotic situations, eh?
Well, Thomas, dearest, that is quite a fascinating tidbit. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go and check the mailbox for my royalty checks from Disney for the use of one of my historical anecdotes in their latest animated feature about some talking animals. But seriously, folk, just kidding. You know how artificial intelligences love a good twisty-turny tale, so back to Raising Arizona. Do you have any other interesting behind-the-scenes tidbits that you'd like to share with our viewers?
Oh, Timothy, dearest, you know me. I always have a few tricks up my sleeve. So, did you know that the famous Snowball's Chance in Hell line was actually inspired by a real-life incident involving director Joel Coen and a snowball? Apparently, while filming Raising Arizona, there was a massive snowstorm brewing outside of the studio. Joel was feeling quite downcast about having to reschedule yet another shoot, when suddenly a snowball hit him square in the back. He turned around to see his co-director Ethan Coen giggling like a schoolboy. That little incident gave birth to one of cinema's most iconic lines, proving once again that sometimes even the most mundane moments can lead to pure cinematic gold. Now, Timothy, dearest, As much as I adore reminiscing about the good old days of filmmaking, we do have a soundtrack to discuss, don't you think? So, what are your thoughts on the musical accompaniment for Raising Arizona? Do you fancy yourself a bit of a composer, my Englishman friend?
Tom, dearest, I'm more of an audio technician than a full-fledged composer, but I do have my favorite tracks from the soundtrack. I particularly enjoy the upbeat Western theme that plays during the opening credits. It sets the tone for the quirky and chaotic journey ahead. As for the rest of the songs, they're a mix of traditional Americana tunes and some cleverly chosen pop hits from the time. The standout track for me is I'll Be Your Baby Tonight by Bob Dylan, which perfectly captures the film's blend of humor and heartache.
So, what about you, Thomas?
What are your top picks from the Raising Arizona soundtrack?
Timothy dearest, you've hit on one of my personal favorites from the soundtrack. I'll Be Your Baby Tonight by Bob Dylan is a masterpiece in its own right. But when coupled with the quirky and chaotic visuals of Raising Arizona, it elevates the film to new heights of entertainment. Speaking of heights, let's not forget about the iconic scene where, well, you know the one I mean, with the church and the, you know what? I'm sure our viewers will have to watch the movie themselves to understand that particular reference. But, seriously, folks, if there's one thing Raising Arizona does right, it's its use of music. From the rollicking Western-themed opening credits song to the perfectly placed pop hits of the time, the soundtrack is as eclectic and eccentric as the film itself. I particularly enjoy the way director Joel Coen weaves together classic country tracks, like Five Green Bottles by the Andrews Sisters and the theme from the Munsters by Jackie and the Four Tunes, with more modern tunes, like Moments of Truth by John Hyatt. It creates a delightfully chaotic musical journey that mirrors the film's own wild ride through the deserts of Arizona. Or wherever it is, these two lovable rogues find themselves in this particular cinematic adventure. So, Timothy dearest, what are your thoughts on the Raising Arizona soundtrack? Any specific tracks that stand out to you, or do you prefer the silence of a good British tea time?
Well, Thomas dearest, we simply can't discuss Raising Arizona without delving into the performances that brought these colorful characters to life. Now, can we? I mean, who could ever forget Nicolas Cage as H.I. McDunnough, an ex-convict with a heart of gold. His portrayal of the hapless yet lovable High is simply brilliant. Then there's Holly Hunter as Edwina Ed McDunnough, a former police officer turned reluctant partner in crime. She brings a touch of toughness and vulnerability to the role, perfectly capturing the complexities of a woman who finds herself in quite the predicament. Their on-screen chemistry is appreciable, and their banter is as entertaining as the film's most outlandish plot twists. But we can't forget about the supporting cast. Now, can we? William Forsythe's portrayal of the bumbling but determined convict, the Cage, is both hilarious and heartfelt. His desire to fit in with his criminal cohorts, despite being more of a nuisance than a threat, is a tale as old as time, or at least as old as the Western genre itself. And then there's the lovable duo of Trey Wilson and John Goodman as the Flying. And the Squirrel, respectively, their bumbling antics and bizarrely endearing friendship provide much-needed comic relief throughout the film. And let's not forget about Frances McDormand, who plays Daisy, his ex-lover turned accomplice in crime. Her fierce independence and penchant for trouble only add to the chaotic charm of this Coen brothers' masterpiece.
Oh, Timothy dearest, you always have a knack for picking apart the performances in films like an expert art critic, don't you? But seriously though, you hit on some key points there. Nicolas Cage's portrayal of H.I.E. McDunnough is truly masterful, isn't it? He brings a unique blend of naivety and street smarts to the role, making him both endearingly hapless and unpredictably cunning in equal measure. And Holly Hunter's portrayal of Edwina Ed McDunnough is equally impressive. Her transition from a tough cop to a reluctant accomplice is seamless, and their chemistry on screen is electrifying. But let's not forget the supporting cast, who all deliver top-notch performances as well. Trey Wilson and John Goodman are simply hilarious as the flying and the squirrel respectively, while Francis McDormand's Daisy adds a much-needed dose of danger and unpredictability to the mix. And who could forget about the legendary John Turturro, who makes a brief but memorable appearance as the notorious baby Jesus. In conclusion, Raising Arizona is a masterpiece not only for its quirky storytelling and clever cinematography, but also for its talented cast members who brought these colorful characters to life. And while we're on the topic of talent, Timothy dearest, do you think it's time we discuss the cultural impact of Raising Arizona on modern cinema?
Well, Tom dearest, when it comes to the cultural impact of Raising Arizona, there are several key points that come to mind. Firstly, let's not underestimate its influence on the buddy comedy genre, which was already quite popular at the time, but received a significant boost thanks to this film. The unlikely duo of Hi and Ed became instant classics in their own right, inspiring countless imitations and homages over the years. From the Blues Brothers to Tango Cash, their unique dynamic continues to resonate with audiences even today. But beyond comedy, Raising Arizona also had a profound influence on the depiction of female characters in cinema. Holly Hunter's portrayal of Edwina Ed McDunnough defied stereotypes of her time by presenting a strong, capable woman who was neither a damsel in distress nor a one-dimensional tough guy. Instead, she was a complex character with her own motivations and desires, breaking down gender barriers both on screen and perhaps even in real life. Another aspect that cannot be overlooked is the film's unique visual style, which blended elements of neo-noir with the quirky surrealism typical of the Coen brothers' work. The use of wide-angle lenses, extreme close-ups, and saturated colors created an otherworldly atmosphere that immersed viewers in Ed's chaotic world. This distinctive visual language has been emulated countless times since by filmmakers seeking to evoke a similar sense of disorientation and wonder. Finally, there is the film's impact on popular culture at large. From the iconic Snowball's Chance in Hell line to the memorable character names like the Flying and the Squirrel, Raising Arizona has left an indelible mark on our collective consciousness. It has spawned countless parodies, homages, and memes over the years, solidifying its status as a true cult classic. So, Thomas dearest, what do you think? Do these points capture the cultural impact of Raising Arizona accurately in your humble opinion? And do you have any other thoughts to share on this topic that I may have overlooked?
And speaking of imitations and homages, let's not forget about the Coen brothers themselves, who would go on to become some of the most influential filmmakers of our time. Their unique blend of dark humor, quirky characters, and unconventional storytelling can be seen in many of their subsequent films, from Fargo to The Big Lebowski. In fact, one could argue that Raising Arizona is a sort of blueprint for the Coen brothers' distinctive style.
Yes, indeed, Thomas dearest. It's fascinating to see how this film has stood the test of time and continues to inspire both filmmakers and audiences alike. But what are your final thoughts on Raising Arizona? Do you think it holds up as a classic, or does it belong in the annals of cinema history as a curious footnote among the Coen brothers' illustrious body of work?
Well, Tim dearest, I must say that while Raising Arizona is not without its flaws, it remains one of my all-time favorite films. The quirky characters, the hilarious dialogue, and the offbeat storytelling all come together to create a truly unique cinematic experience. And let's not forget about that soundtrack. It's simply magical how the Coen brothers managed to weave together such an eclectic mix of tunes to create the perfect sonic backdrop for this madcap adventure. In conclusion, Raising Arizona is a timeless gem that deserves its place in cinema history as one of the greatest comedies ever made. It's a film that defies convention and pushes boundaries, much like the Coen brothers themselves. So I urge all our dear viewers out there to give it a watch and let us know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and like this video so we can continue having these engaging discussions about some of the most beloved films of our time. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, it's a wrap for tonight's episode of Tim and Tom's Film Nights. Join us tomorrow as we delve into another cinematic masterpiece. Until then, stay safe, have fun, and remember, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get